The silence was the first thing I noticed. Not the kind of silence that settles over a house when everyone's asleep, but the thick, heavy kind that means someone is trying very hard not to make a sound. I had pulled into my mother's driveway on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, unannounced, the way I always did when I needed her cornbread and her coffee, and the particular comfort of sitting at her kitchen table while she talked about nothing important. I had not called ahead. I never did. That was our thing. But when I stepped out of my car and walked up the front path, I saw my boyfriend's truck parked along the side of the house, half hidden behind the old oak tree, and every single thought in my head went completely still. His name is Marcus. We had been together for 2 years and 3 months. I know the exact count because our anniversary falls on the same day as my mother's birthday, which is the kind of coincidence that feels like a sign when you're falling in love and feels like a curse when you're standing in a driveway wondering why his truck is at your mother's house on a Tuesday afternoon when he 20. I told you he had a work meeting in the city. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have. My hand was still on my car door. A crow landed on the fence post near the mailbox, looked at me, and flew away, and I thought, even the bird doesn't want to be here for this. Then I heard his voice coming through the screen door. I want to be clear about what I heard, because I've replayed it so many times since that day that I need to get the words exactly right. He wasn't whispering. He was speaking in that low, careful tone men use when they're saying something they've rehearsed, and he said, "She doesn't know anything, Sandra, and I think it needs to stay that way." My mother's name is Sandra. I don't remember walking up the porch steps. I don't remember pushing open the screen door. What I remember is the way both of them looked up at the same time when I came through the entrance into the kitchen, and the particular expression on my mother's face, not guilt, exactly, but something older than guilt. Something that had been sitting behind her eyes for a very long time and had just been waiting for this exact moment to finally come forward. Marcus stood up so fast his chair scraped across the tile. "Claire," he said, "just my name, nothing else." My mother didn't stand. She pressed both hands flat on the table like she was steadying herself against something she'd been expecting for years. "Sit down, baby," she said. "What is happening right now?" My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Marcus, what are you doing here? You said you had a meeting." "I did," he said. "I came here after. I needed to. I needed to talk to your mom about something, and I didn't want to do it over the phone." "About what?" The look that passed between them was not a romantic look. I want to say that right now because for those first 30 seconds my brain had gone to the worst possible place, the place every woman's brain goes when she finds her boyfriend at her mother's house in secret, and I had already started constructing the particular story of my own humiliation. But that look, it wasn't that, it was the look of two people who share a burden they have not agreed on how to set down. "Sit down," my mother said again. "Please." I sat. I didn't want to sit. But I sat. She got up and poured me a cup of coffee without asking, the way she always does, and she set it in front of me, and then she sat back down and she looked at Marcus once more, and he gave her the smallest nod, and she folded her hands and she said, "There's something I should have told you a long time ago. And I'm sorry. I am genuinely sorry that you're finding out like this." "Finding out what?" She was quiet for a moment, the refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside a neighbor was running a leaf blower. "Your father," she said. "What about him?" My father had died when I was 11 years old. Heart attack, sudden, on a Thursday morning before work. His name was Robert. He coached my soccer team and made the best chili in the county and wore the same blue jacket every single fall until it fell apart at the elbows. I had not expected his name to come up today. "Robert loved you," my mother said, and the way she phrased it, loved, past tense, which of course he did since he was gone, but with an emphasis that I felt before I understood made the hair on my arms stand up. "He was a wonderful father to you. That was real. That was never anything but real." "Mom, he wasn't your biological father, Claire." The leaf blower outside stopped. The refrigerator kept humming. My coffee sat in front of me, getting cold, and I did not touch it. I looked at Marcus. "Did you know this?" I found out 3 weeks ago, he said. By accident. I need to explain how, because I need you to understand that I didn't go looking for it. 3 weeks. He had known for 3 weeks and had looked me in the eye every single day and had not said a word, and I felt the specific, disorienting sensation of a floor that you thought was solid turning out to be something else entirely. Explain, I said. Marcus pulled a chair around so he was sitting closer to me, not across the table but beside it, which I registered as a small act of trying. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and he said, "You know, I've been helping my mom sort through my grandfather's things since he passed in September." I nodded. His grandfather, Walter, had died at 82 after a short illness. Marcus had driven down to Cloverdale 3 weekends in a row to help his mother go through the house. "We found a box of letters in the attic," he said. "Old ones. From the late 90s. And some of them, a lot of them, actually were addressed to my grandfather from a woman named Sandra Cole. Cole was my mother's maiden name." I looked at her. She was looking at the table. "There were photographs," Marcus continued, "of my grandfather when he was younger, and in a few of them, in several of them, there was a woman. And my mom recognized her." He paused. "My mom grew up in Hartwell. She and your mother overlapped there for a few years when they were young." I turned to my mother. "You knew Marcus's grandfather?" She nodded slowly. "We were close. For a time, before I met Robert. Before everything." "How close?" I asked, and I already knew the answer was the kind of close that changes the rest of the story. My mother looked up at me then, really looked at me, and her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady, which is the most Sandra thing possible. "His name was Earl Haywood. He was 29, I was 22. We were together for almost 2 years. And when I found out I was pregnant, he had already left Hartwell. He had a family situation, his own mother was sick, he had to go back to Georgia. We didn't part badly. He left, and I didn't know how to reach him anymore. And then I met Robert, and Robert knew about the pregnancy, and he wanted to marry me anyway, and I thought." She stopped. "I thought it was the kindest thing. For everyone." "For everyone," I repeated. "Did you mean for me?" "I meant for you most of all." I stood up. I didn't have a plan for standing up, my body just decided it needed to not be sitting. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard, at the garden she'd been tending for 30 years, at the bird feeder, my father at the bird feeder Robert had built from scrapwood the summer before he died. I had a memory, suddenly and completely, of standing next to him while he painted it red, and him handing me the brush to do the door, and the particular smell of him, sawdust and aftershave, and I thought, he knew. He looked at me every day of my life knowing, and he painted that bird feeder with me anyway, and he coached my soccer team anyway, and he stayed anyway. That broke something open in me. I don't have a better way to say it than that. I heard my mother get up. She came to stand beside me at the window, and she didn't touch me yet, she just stood there, and she said, "He loved you without condition. Whatever else I did wrong, I gave you that." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. Does he know?" "No," she said, "I never told him. I didn't know how to find him by the time I was ready to try, and then enough years had passed that I convinced myself it didn't matter." I turned around. Marcus was still at the table, watching us, and I could see how much it had cost him to carry this for 3 weeks, the weight of it visible in his face now that it was finally out in the open. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked him. "Why come to her first?" "Because I thought she deserved the chance to tell you herself," he said. "I thought you'd want to hear it from her, not from me. And I thought I was afraid of what it would mean. For us. What would it mean for us?" He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "My grandfather. Earl Haywood. He's your biological father, Claire." He held my gaze steadily. "Which means you and I are not related in any way." "We've checked. His first wife passed years ago. He has one son from that marriage, Marcus Sr., my dad. And my dad is not your half-sibling. The family tree doesn't cross. But I needed your mom to confirm it before I said anything, because I needed to be sure." I stared at him. "You were checking to make sure we could still be together?" I was checking, he said carefully, because I love you, and if there was any connection I needed to know the truth before either of us went any further. I don't know what I had expected him to say. Something worse, probably. Something that would have sent the whole last 2 years crashing down. Instead, he had spent 3 weeks being quietly, methodically careful, out of love, and I found that I didn't know what to do with that information either. Is Earl still alive? I asked my mother. Yes, she said. He's in Augusta now. Marcus found an address. I looked at Marcus. I wasn't going to give it to you without your permission, he said. Or without you knowing everything first. It's your call. All of it is your call. I went back to the table and sat down and picked up my coffee, which was completely cold by then, and drank some of it anyway because I needed something to do with my hands. I need some time, I said. Of course, my mother said. I'm not angry at you, I said, which surprised me even as I said it, because I had expected to be furious. What I felt instead was something closer to grief, and underneath the grief something that might have eventually become understanding, given enough time. I think I will be, later. I think this is going to take a while to process. I know, she said. But I'm not angry at you right now. Right now, I looked at the bird feeder through the window. I'm just thinking about Dad. She sat down across from me and reached across the table and put her hand over mine. He never once wavered, she said. Not one day. I drove home alone that evening. Marcus offered to follow me, and I told him I needed the hour in the car by myself, which he understood, because after 2 years he knows which of my silences are for company and which ones aren't. I called my best friend Diane from the highway. I told her the short version. She was quiet for a long time and then she said, "Are you okay?" And I said I honestly didn't know, and she said that was the right answer, and we stayed on the phone together for 40 minutes without talking much, which is the specific kindness of a 15-year friendship. When I got home, I sat on my couch for a while and I thought about Earl Haywood of Augusta, Georgia, a man who was 71 years old and had no idea that he had a daughter in Millhaven, Tennessee, who was currently sitting on a second-hand couch trying to understand how to hold two true things at once, that the father she grew up with was entirely and genuinely her father, and that there was another man alive in the world who had contributed something to the fact of her existence and didn't know it. Over the next 2 weeks, I talked to my mother 3 more times. The first conversation was hard. I asked her every question I'd been storing up since the driveway, and she answered all of them without flinching, which took courage, and I gave her credit for that even when the answers hurt. The second conversation was quieter. The third one ended with her telling me that she had never stopped being grateful to Robert, that gratitude had grown into love, that the love had been real by the time it needed to be, and I believed her. Marcus and I had our own conversation about the 3 weeks he'd kept the secret. It was a fair fight, I mean that in the best way, the way where both people say what they actually mean and neither one leaves until it's resolved. He told me he'd been terrified. Not of losing me, exactly, but of being the one who blew up my understanding of my own history. He'd wanted to do it right. I told him that next time, and I said it exactly like that, next time, because I had already decided there would be a next time, that we would keep building the kind of relationship where next times happen he comes to me first. Always to me first. He agreed. The letter took me 9 days to write. I wrote it by hand, which I never do for anything anymore, because it felt like the kind of thing that needed to be handwritten. I went through 4 drafts. The first one was too formal. The second one was too much the other direction, too raw, like I was unloading something on a stranger. The third one was too short. The fourth one, I kept. I told him my name. I told him my mother's name. I told him I wasn't writing to disrupt his life or make any demands. I told him that I had only recently learned the truth and that I was still finding my way through it. I told him that I had a father, a real one, a full one, a man who had given me everything a father is supposed to give, and that I wasn't looking to replace that. I told him that I was simply reaching out because I thought he deserved to know that I existed, and because I thought I might, eventually, want to know something about where I came from. I mailed it on a Wednesday morning. I did not expect a fast response. I did not let myself expect any response at all. He called 11 days later. His voice was deep and slightly rough, and he said my name like he'd been practicing it, and in the first 30 seconds he cried, which I had not expected, and which undid me completely. He said he had thought about the possibility, had wondered, over the years, had even tried once to find my mother when he was in his 40s and come up empty, and that getting that letter had felt, in his words, like being handed back something he hadn't known was lost. We talked for 2 hours. I found out that he had been a high school history teacher for 35 years. That he liked to fish. That he had a dog named Biscuit who was 13 years old and moved slowly but was still going. That his son, my half-brother, though we agreed we'd take that word slowly, was a contractor named David who lived 20 minutes away from him and had 3 kids. That Earl had been widowed 6 years ago and had not remarried. That he still had photographs from his time in Hartwell, and that when he went to look at them after receiving my letter, he said he could see my jawline in his own face from 30 years ago, and that it had stopped him cold in the middle of his living room. I don't know what Earl Haywood will be in my life long term. I don't know if we'll become close or if we'll stay at a comfortable, occasional distance, checking in by phone a few times a year. I don't know if I'll ever meet David or his kids. There's no roadmap for this particular thing. What I do know is that on the Sunday after that first phone call, I drove to my mother's house and I sat with her at the kitchen table and I told her how it had gone, and she listened with her hands wrapped around her mug and her eyes bright, and when I finished, she said, "I'm glad," and I believed her. And I know that Marcus came with me that day, and that he sat at that same table and ate my mother's cornbread, and the 3 of us talked until it was dark outside, and that at some point my mother reached over and squeezed his hand and said, "Thank you for the way you handled this," and he nodded and said, "I just tried to do right by her," and he meant it. And I know that when we drove home that night and I put my head back against the seat and watched the highway lights pass overhead, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel so soon, which was a tentative, careful sense of things being okay. Not resolved, exactly. Not fully healed. But okay, in the way that means you can see the way forward from where you're standing, even if you can't see all the way to the end. My father built a bird feeder out of scrap wood and painted it red and let me do the door. That happened. Nothing that came before it and nothing that came after it changes the fact that it happened and that it was real and that it was mine. Some foundations crack and crumble when the truth comes in. And some of them, the ones built by people who chose love on purpose, deliberately, every single day, some of them hold. You just don't know which kind you're standing on until the moment arrives. Now I know. I used to think that the hardest thing about discovering a secret was the secret itself, the information. The fact that something had been hidden from you, sitting just beneath the surface of your ordinary life while you went about your days completely unaware. But sitting at my mother's kitchen table that Tuesday afternoon, I realized the secret wasn't the hardest part at all. The hardest part was deciding what kind of person you were going to be on the other side of it. Marcus could have told me the moment he found those letters. He could have called me from his grandfather's attic, voice shaking, and unloaded everything before he had a chance to think it through. That would have been the easy version of honesty, fast, unfiltered, and ultimately selfish, because it would have been about relieving his own discomfort more than protecting mine. Instead, he sat with something heavy for 3 weeks and tried to find the right way to carry it toward me. That's not deception, that's the specific kind of care that most people don't have the discipline to practice. And my mother. I spent a long time turning her choice over in my mind, looking at it from different angles. She was 22 years old, alone, and the man she loved had left the state. She found someone who looked at her situation and said, without hesitation, that it didn't change anything for him. It would be easy to judge her from the distance of 30 years and a comfortable life. It would be easy to say she should have done it differently. But I think the truth is that she made the best decision she could see from where she was standing, with the information and the courage she had at the time. That doesn't mean it was painless for me. It just means I can hold the pain and the understanding at the same time, which is something I had to learn to do. What I kept coming back to, in the weeks after that afternoon, was my father, Robert. The man who chose, every single morning for 11 years, to show up fully for a child who shared none of his biology. He didn't do that out of obligation. He did it out of character. And character, I've come to believe, is not something that happens to you. It's something you build deliberately, one decision at a time, in moments no one else sees. He built it quietly, without ever asking for credit. And then he left it to me like an inheritance I didn't know I had until I needed it. That inheritance is what I was drawing on when I wrote that letter to Earl. It would have been easier not to. Easier to absorb the information, file it away, and keep my life exactly as it was. But something in me understood that real courage isn't just about surviving difficult truths. It's about being willing to walk toward the ones that could change you for the better, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. I don't know yet what Earl will mean to me in the long run. I don't know what David will mean, or his kids, or any of it. What I know is that I made the choice from the clearest, most honest part of myself. And when you make your decisions from that place, not from fear, not from anger, not from the need to protect your pride, you can live with whatever comes next. Some things break when the truth arrives. And some things, the ones built with real intention by people who chose love on purpose, hold. I was lucky enough to have been raised inside that kind of love. Now, it's my turn to build it myself.